Oh, good morning, everybody. How the heck are we doing today?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, y'all.
Hey, Kevin, you're a little low. Can you bring up your sound a bit? Sorry, it's good to see everybody.
Kevin literally bringing his sound up.
I did. I was like, I don't know what else to do. I don't think I have a. Maybe I
don't have that toggle.
If there's a better adjustment there. I think it was just me at the time.
All right.
I was reading something and I forgot to get on YouTube and all this stuff. So I'm like trying to figure out what am I doing next.
What else is going on? Right. Hey, it's good to see everybody today. Are you guys having a good week? A short week this week. Are you enjoying you getting back into things?
It weirdly doesn't feel like a short week. Am I crazy? Felt like I got everything else done.
Oh, well, that's good. Good. Well, got plans for the weekend at all?
I don't. I'm surprised that I have a whole, like I asked my wife last night, I'm like, there's nothing on our plan, is there? So it's, I don't know, just maybe do fabric stuff all weekend, right?
Oh, there you go.
Some other data engineering, maybe something that I learned here today.
Well, let's fingers crossed.
It's a big goal.
Learning on Friday? Who does that?
Well, it is great seeing everybody in the chat. We got Jack, Donald, Mark, Aaron. Good to see you guys. It's great to have everybody here. And if you're new in the chat, or if you haven't said anything, leave a message in the chat. Love to hear what everybody's up to this weekend, what you got going on. Yes, this is a 5-people party today. So, Andy, thank you for joining us today. How are you, sir?
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. Well, we're talking citizen data engineering today, and I thought if we're going to be talking citizen data engineering, we got to have the OG data engineering guy on board. So, wanted to have you here, Andy.
Oh,
he's sneaking up behind you.
I was going to say and since he was busy, you invited me.
Yeah. He was invited, but couldn't make it. So
couldn't make it. I get it.
Yeah. So let's do Andy instead.
Yeah. Well, people are busy on Fridays. That's how.
It's a huge honor always to attend the show. I watch it almost every Friday, and this is my second appearance, so I feel very, very honored to be here today. Thank y'all.
Well, we're excited to have you. All right, before we dive into the topics, I just want to hit up a few things that have kind of come out recently. This was the first place I saw this announcement, but Remerit or Arun Ulag reposted Remerit's announcement. But FabCon 2026 is out. It's going to be in Atlanta, Georgia, March 16th through the 20th. So, block your calendars. Let your boss know you're going to need some funding for this. Get a plan together to attend FabCon this year. To me, I don't attend a lot of conferences, but this is one that we want to make it a priority to go out and attend. So this is one I'd want to sign up for. Yes, and here is the registration site. So if you want to be bold and you already have funding for March of 2023 and you want to get that out of the way, you could do that right now. Although, let's see. Holy cow. It looks like tickets start at $2,700 and they go down to $1,600. So you can go ahead and sign up right away. They do have one-day workshop prices or workshop only prices. So if you want to do that as well, you can do that. But I'd probably hold off on registering because unless you have budget you need to spend right now, they will have discounts that will come out as we go. Okay.
I like the nod to medallion architecture in terms of the past names.
Good call out.
Yeah, look at that. Where's my silver and bronze, though?
Yeah, that's behind the scenes. That's not access to the public.
It's actually, those are the partner levels that we can sign up for. So we're talking about that right now. So, and then the other thing I want to hit in on before we jump in is Kevin. You've got an incredible shirt there. What can you show us?
Yeah, let me move since you might not hear me now, but so Power BI is going to be celebrating its 10th birthday this year. So SML, Mark Waters in particular, helped design out a shirt that we're starting to show around for Power BI 10. Thanks for 10 years of insights. And so that link, I think, is coming into the chat here right now. So you can go and support it yourself and be ready for all the big birthday celebrations. Pink is kind of nice.
Look at that. Deep royal.
So, yeah, I mean, start getting ready for how you want to celebrate Power BI's 10th birthday. I think officially it's in July, but I suspect we'll start, now that we're just about into June anyways, I think we'll start hearing some things late June, mid to late June, about things that people are doing to celebrate Power BI's 10th birthday.
Oh, Kevin, it's on my birthday.
Is it your birthday?
It is. It was released on my 52nd birthday. So July 24th, when I turned 62 rather, Power BI turns 10.
Wow.
Nice.
That's how I remember it. I wouldn't remember it. It's all about me, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, you're the OG, so it's got to be about you.
It's all about Power BI. It's an amazing platform.
It's all about getting your data prepped correctly to get the insights out of Power BI. Then Power BI becomes easy.
Right. Well, and I think that's how we get ourselves into the topic of self-service data engineering. So Power BI, let's hop in our Wayback Machine to over 10 years ago, before Power BI was a thing. If you were in a business and you needed a report, who did you talk to?
Somebody like a DBA, a data guy, like somebody that was in that kind of world, right? And then they threw a query together in a kind of mystical way that they would. Tell me what you want, and okay, let me go see if I could put this query together. That's all you heard. And then they would come out with something, and where would it land? Probably Excel, right?
Yep.
And so then, Donald's comment, IT. Yeah, so that person lives in IT usually, and lands in Excel. And then Excel had some good visualization tools in it, right, back then. And I think this is kind of how Power BI got launched, right? As everybody kind of knows, things started in like add-ons from Excel, and it seemed like you had to kind of put stuff together yourself, and it was going, well, this is really nice. And then all of a sudden they come out with a tool that starts packaging all these things together, and then it expands from there. So,
well, and Donald's exactly right. So you had to go to IT because Excel only lets you have 32,000 records. And so if you needed more than that, or if there's more data than that you then have to aggregate on top of, IT would have to prep and get ready the aggregation for you so that you could have under 37,000 records that you could then load into Excel and then you could do something with, right?
I'm not going to lie. This is all before my time. I'm like blown away that this is how you guys had to do it. I'm like, how did you?
Well,
how did you do anything with 32,000 rows?
Well, and SSRS was in there from the Microsoft stack quite a bit, right? So these, when you were writing a report, if you're on the Microsoft shop, you were already implying that you were doing it with SSRS. So, but Excel obviously has always been big and still is, right?
Yep. And then
the last requirement, how do I export to Excel?
Yeah. Well, right. And then Donald's calling out right. then came Power Pivot. What did Power Pivot allow us to do? We'll see if now, Jared, this is probably before your time too, because now we're back in near Stone Age. But Jared, what did Power Pivot enable our users to do in Excel?
So Power Pivot, oh gosh, I have to remember, because this actually, Power Pivot, when it was introduced, was around the time I started getting into data engineering. So there it was starting. That wasn't the start of tabular. I thought
Power Pivot was the start of tabular.
Was the origins of tabular. So there at least we were starting to head in the directions of a different storage format. You still be able to use Excel as a main interface for it, up until the point that then they started releasing tabular models themselves, with, what was it, 2014, although you could technically do it in SQL 2012.
Yes.
If I remember right.
That's correct. And Donald's pointed out, like in 2023, it was 65,000 records in Excel 2003. Sorry, not 2023. Excel 2003 allowed for 65,000 records. In 2007, we went up to 1 million. But Power Query allowed us access to millions and millions of records inside of Excel for the very first time. And so that broke the barrier that was really, hey, one side of the house had to be IT. And now once Power Query came into play, now all of a sudden, people outside of IT were able to query lots and lots of information. And Andy, how did that change the way IT had to respond and prepare and data for that new consumption pattern?
Well, similar to when there was a limit, 64K rows, if you went beyond the limits of the tool, then aggregation certainly had to happen. But it did open a door to a significant, collection of data sets. Because if you think about querying the data and actually doing an analysis on even 32,000 rows, 65,000 rows, what have you, that's an awful lot to have to scroll through, at least in a grid. Now, if you're drawing a chart, then certainly, you can use that much data. You can kind of get your mind around looking at a chart and seeing even 1 million rows worth of data. But being able all of a sudden to visualize more and more data, it opened that door to big data. And I think citizen data science, data analytics, certainly citizen data engineering was all kind of born around that same time when we enabled it. It's debatable whether self-service BI is a real thing or not. Let's start there.
That's a whole definitional
but it enabled
problem
the idea.
too.
At least it facilitated the idea. People could at least attempt to write their own reports and do their own work. And frankly, a number of people are very good at that and always have been, whatever the tool, Excel, reporting services, what have you. So, but it was an interesting time because we saw this, I don't know, it was almost tectonic. There was this new layer of people in the mix executing queries, and some of them were even efficient queries. But everybody did their best.
Just some.
Everybody's exactly. Everybody's doing their best. You kind of because at one time we were all doing our best as well.
Well, and that's exactly right. And Andy, you bring to light the key thing I was going to say there is now we started to introduce the topic of like, how do we govern access outside of the structured walls of IT to that underlying data so that people are able to do their work. And there was a myriad of responses there. Some was like, are we 5 minutes in? Okay, I can say this. Hell no, like nobody gets access to any of the data, right? And those organizations began the they began to say hell no, but what ended up happening is the proliferation of spread marts and CSVs as the source for like crazy ass shadow IT architectures. And Christina, have you ever had to deal with that type of a solution that's kind of overgrown but critical? Right?
Yes. Yeah. So I actually used to be part of the problem. Fun fact. So
okay. And are we sure you're still not?
well, now they give me keys, so
So,
I can fix it myself when I break things. But I used to book trucks. That used to be my job. And I had a bunch of broker data, whatever, and I would put it in Power BI. I would export it to Excel. I used to bug all of my DBAs for data, so I did have to do all that. And then at one point they said, hey, why don't you be on the analytics team? And so they gave me access to the SQL database. And then they changed my password until I took some SQL optimization courses. So if that tells you anything about my journey. I'm a big fan now of optimization. I learned my lesson very well. They did a great job, I think, of taking, somebody who, I was causing a lot of issues. I had a lot of questions, and they did a really great job of not tampering my passion for it, but really directing it and guiding it. And so I try and take that into other clients that I am talking to of like, you don't want to squash the person who is learning and exploring data. You want them able to do it. When they get to a certain threshold, though, you should have a little bell in your head that says, oh, should they be part of our team? Right? Should we bring them into the fold? Should we actually give them training? Like there is a threshold, I think, where citizen developers get to where now they need the tool, right? Now to do anything that they're actually questioning and like really excited about, they're going to need to get into, data engineering or SQL or, there's layers to that too, but they're going to need some help. They need a little bit of a guide along the way.
Yeah.
How did you find out that your password was changed? Just because you
they
couldn't
didn't
log
tell
in,
me.
or
I
no?
couldn't log in.
It was very passive aggressive. Huh? It wasn't.
I was in Minnesota. I didn't really expect too much different from passive aggressiveness, but my boss actually
isn't that
had
their
to
state
call them.
motto? Minnesota, passive aggressive. Yeah.
That just Minnesota? I thought that was a whole Midwest thing that we get balked at for.
It's close. Yeah, Minnesotans have a high concentration of it, I think.
So then you had to kind of ask what was going on, and they said and you had to find your own training class or optimization class.
They recommended 3 classes for me. So I ended up going with a Udemy one, and I took it over the weekend. And basically, it was like 12 hours of stuff that I learned. I showed them the certificate of completion, and then they asked me, how would you rewrite this query you wrote last week? So it was good.
I'd put 5 more joins on it or I'd use cross supply.
Honestly, CTEs changed my world, right? Like I was just doing subselects and joins, just really terrible stuff. And so when I learned CTEs, that was like, oh, I don't have to pull in millions of rows that I don't need. I can summarize a bunch of it ahead of time, pull it in. Those concepts I had no idea of, right? Like that was just totally foreign. Learning that made a huge difference in my optimization. And
hang on a second, Christina. You're jumping way ahead. Well,
sorry.
Can you explain what a CTE is for our audience?
Common table expression. So there's a few ways to do it. So the way that I learned initially was a select into with a hashtag. And so basically it creates this temporary table that you drop at the end of your query. And the nice thing about that is, let's say that I have, one thing I was doing pretty often was I had a wide range of dimensions. And so I had to make a unified dimension as part of my query. And so one thing I would do at the CTE is make a distinct list of customers from all these different brokerage systems, right? Or maybe vendors. I would make this distinct list using a few of these CTEs. So then at the end of the day, when I join that to my fact table, I only have to join a distinct list once. I've got this small set of data I'm joining onto it instead of what I was doing, which is joining multiple, essentially fact tables, right, with millions and millions of rows on multiple times and then doing a distinct. Not great, not good. So I learned a lot, and I also learned a lot about data accuracy with that, because it really improves the quality of your data, right?
Well, and Christina, I think this is an excellent example of the journey of a citizen data engineer from the business into the as a citizen engineer. Now you're talking about the analytics journey, but this really also applies to like the data engineering journey as well. Let's compare that to Jared. We're going to put you in the spotlight. Jared, your background is theater. How did you go from theater and Shakespeare to SQL and Python and the data space?
So me, it's a very, I'll say, non-traditional approach. So I actually started my journey transitioning from help desk work, which was my first job I got out of college. And funny story, I was working for a nonprofit, and they had started this new BI initiative, and everybody's like, "Ooh, BI, what's this stuff?" And brought this nice fancy consultant in, was doing a bunch of work, and then now having worked in consulting, I'm not quite sure how they got away with this, but for somehow the consultant we were working with left the organization, and when they left, the consulting group dropped the contract. They stopped working with us. So we were left with a partially developed BI solution that was, at the time it was SSIS. We were doing a little bit of analysis services, multi-dimensional, all of that fun stuff. And we're like, well, we have no direction of where to go. So I raised my hand and I'm like, well, I have a theater degree, but I also have a comp-sci degree in there as well. This is at least a little bit closer to what I wanted to do than help desk work. Will you give me a shot? I kid you not there. In case you didn't know, there is a Microsoft Business Intelligence for Dummies book. If you know the For Dummies series, there was one specifically out there for that. So I said, hey, give me a shot. I read that book cover to cover, and before I knew it, I was learning data engineering on my own. So I kind of was the technically skipped the citizen data engineering phase, but I kind of had to because nobody else could do it.
Yeah, and I think that this is a perfect contrast, right? We've got Jared here who went up the IT route and went into the engineering, and we've got Christina who came from the business and went up the business route, right? And Gartner would say you need to have a framework in place that supports both sides of this house, because the classic engineering side is where you're going to like start with your college grads and start with people on that side. But they're saying that you're going to get like so much value out of anytime you can find people in the business who really understand the business to start getting working in data engineering. And that's why they want to like make this a thing, right? And that's where we get like into like our citizen data engineering. And I think I'm going to propose that there's kind of like two different areas that we're talking about. One, which is the group of citizens that have come down the Power Query route and that have started in Power BI, started loading tabular models, started loading all this stuff. They can now take what they know for sourcing information. Like, hey, Alex, how many connectors are there in Power Query? Like 400, something like that, right? Like there's so many connectors in Power Query that they can just go out, grab data from wherever it is, bring it into their reports, do a whole bunch of things. But those Power BI people are starting to run into those classical data engineering challenges of like, okay, I know how to write my Power Query to go to Salesforce to get all of my customer information. but I've now stuck that in 50 reports, and now my reports don't refresh or refresh horribly, or I can only refresh some reports on Mondays, other reports on Tuesday, right? Like they've run into that challenge, right?
Or our Salesforce API bill has is very, very high, or we hit API limits because they're in 50 of them. Yeah, all of those type of things.
Yep. And then I think the other side is our Python people. If Curtis was on the email or on the call, he famously said, and I've heard it over and over again, they teach Python in kindergarten these days to people. And he has dedicated the first language his son is going to learn when he's born in July is he's going to teach him Python before he teaches him English, which I think is an interesting choice. But, I feel for
I wonder what the mom has to say about that.
Yeah, I feel for his mom when she's trying to decipher what's going on, and he's the baby's trying
everything in code.
Yeah, relay functions to her or something like that.
If this,
if cry,
print statements, and then do text to voice.
Yeah. So I think these are the two primary sources for where we're going to see, and we need to provide an environment that allows for these two types of citizen and engineers to work and operate. And this is where I think Fabric comes into play as like a super option for our users, right? Because now in Fabric, we can have Dataflow Gen 2s where our Power Query people work, and we can have Python notebooks where Python notebooks work. And people can all kind of operate. Oh my gosh. Holy cow. I so hope that we get a little short of his baby, like that, like learning that as an
That's funny.
Yeah. So
I'll be here all week. Tip your waiters.
So when we talk about these two sources of where we need to be enabling citizen data engineers, does that make sense to you guys?
Yeah. The only thing that I would say that where it comes in is where does SQL come in, right? Like the way
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, right. And I think there's a little bit of a mix because they're not really teaching SQL in universities as much as they're teaching Python, right? I think Jarrett, you had some insights into that or something there.
Yeah, so at least in recent years, I've been working more with local universities, and they ask local professionals like myself to come in and at least talk about what's going on in the industry. At least one of the universities I've been connected to, they're building out their data analytics program into more of a formal major, which will be coming out in the coming years. And it's really interesting to see the curriculum that they have in place because they utilize Python and R quite a bit when we think of data in terms of like the analytics side. They do teach SQL, but I think a lot of times when they're teaching SQL, it's more focused on what I think we would typically think of as more like the DBA role, the creating of tables, indexing, those sorts of things is where SQL comes into the equation. But I think Kevin, that's a really good point about SQL as a language, because if you think about the roots of how the language was originally developed back in the 70s, the language wasn't really intended for like just a bunch of technical people. It was intended for statisticians. It was intended for people who were going to be analyzing data. That's why it came to be. So I think that's interesting to see that. Yeah, I think a lot of times it's left out of that conversation, but I'd still argue, each tool has its pros and cons, and there are certain things you can do in SQL better than you can in Python.
Yeah, and I guess that is exactly where I think these two worlds unite is in SQL.
Chris is ready.
Yeah. It's almost like
It's-
we practiced this ahead of time.
Almost.
But I think, like, we want to enable people with Power Query. We want to enable people with Python. I think we also want to, like, bring these two experiences together with SQL. So if you're bringing data in from your various places with Power Query or Python, we start to encourage people to, like, bring that together with SQL, with those common table expressions, with like actively getting up and running and integrating these data spaces. Andy, as a classic engineer who's had to, like, manage these types of environments, how critical do you think it is to have SQL as part of your solution?
Oh, it's required. You have to understand SQL, and I'll say that it's going to define your success in being able to develop solutions that will scale, that will just initially perform. Your knowledge of SQL, and I say that confessing that I started into this field with very little SQL knowledge, very little. For some reason, I was just attracted to collecting data and beginning to run queries on it. My first database was Access, and right after I blew Access up, trying to load too much data into it, it turns out, I think it was Access 95 or 97. It was that long ago. It would not open an MDB file that was 4 gigs. And that's how I learned about SQL Server. But even then, even after being in the field for a number of years, my SQL skills were low. And I'll say they're lower than they should be now. The good thing about owning a consulting business that, you know, has teams of developers is everybody's better at SQL than me. And so I look and sound very important when I say, I think you should write this query. Let's see how you do. And no, everybody on the team knows it because I'm pretty transparent about that. But I'm a software developer. I was an MCSD, so I kind of came in from that angle. But yeah, vital. Learn SQL. Buy the books, attend the courses, do the courses. Christina mentioned Udemy. There's LinkedIn Learning. There's Pluralsight. There's a number of places out there where you can go get training. Go do that, and it's not just that. Go learn the platforms you mentioned. Do Power Query, learn Power Pivot, learn Python, learn all of those things. The more you know, the better it's going to be. And think of it as a toolbox. Each of these languages and skills that you place in your toolbox, you're going to be better prepared for whatever you encounter.
Yeah, definitely. What you don't want to do is go back and learn databases and SQL the way I learned it. So,
right.
Yeah. Because I started out, my first database that or relational database that I worked with was DB2 on a mainframe. And we learned to design the database. And we literally went to a class, a bunch of us, offsite class, and we were required to bring a black pen, a blue pen, and a red pen. And those 3 pens were used to draw our tables. I think our tables were black, the columns were blue, and then the relationships, the lines were red. And that's how we learned to do design, and then write out the queries that we would do from there. So that's how we learned. Didn't even have a computer in front of us during that whole class.
And today, I'm going to contend you learn all of this stuff with Copilot.
Exactly.
And AI to help you.
AI can even make your sample database. Like, it can help you with those scripts. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, the 2 largest code repositories, let's think about how AI works. AI goes out over large sets of data and learns how that, or large sets of text or code or whatever it is, and learns how that stuff works and is successful. Well, the 2 largest repositories of code that are available out on the internet and Git repos are Python and SQL.
Mhm.
Copilot and AI is going to be exceedingly good of these two spaces. So use Copilot to as part of your learning journey, as your Copilot, not as just like, hey, an AI, but like use it to help you learn and build something. Talk to it, like integrate with it, but use that component to actually like get you to do something. So as you're going through your learning journey, as you take these classes, don't be afraid to like ask Copilot, hey, I'm trying to do this. How do I do that? What's SQL for this? Or what's Python for this? And then look at what it's doing. And if it's doing the right thing, kind of like walk through it and try to understand what it is it's doing. Maybe you'll understand 10% at the start, but eventually you'll understand how the components work together.
I think Copilot's even doing a really good job. Sorry, Jarrett, at the M language as well.
Yeah,
I had that yesterday to where we unfortunately have a direct query model that we need temporarily till we move some stuff, and I needed to add another column to it. And I asked Copilot how to calculate this column. It gave me a way to do it. And I said, hey, will that query fold? And it actually knew that and said, no, it won't. And I said, well, rewrite it to query fold so I could do it. And it changed it around for me. And I mean, I think I could have done it, right? But this was 5 minutes rather than me, trying to remember everything exactly.
Yeah,
it was why. So I think Copilot's getting much, much better at the M language too.
And Jared, you had a great video out on Copilot and SSMS. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, that was the point that I was going to bring up. Is it's a good time to talk about Copilots because, and I'll paste it in chat here. Last week at Build, they announced the public preview of SSMS Copilot. Check out the video. At least I have a instructional video on if you're wanting to get it set up. But I've at least had some chance to work with it now for a bit, and kind of the same thing of I think this is a really good time to talk about its ability to help educate on SQL, because the nice thing about this Copilot is it connects into your query editor window in SSMS. So everything you have context of within your database environment, your tables, indexes that are available, all of that, this Copilot can see that. So if you're looking at figuring out how to write a query to get certain data, it can help you with that. If you're struggling with how to performance optimize it, it also can see your indexes and can help provide guidance on how to best write your query, and also help you identify, similar to what execution plans will do, of are there certain situations where your indexes are missing. So it just hit public preview last week, and I'll say too, the price point on it from the tests I've done on it, not half bad right now. So I would certainly take a look at that, give it a shot, and not just for efficiency, but also for learning the language. It's a really helpful tool.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, now I have plans for the weekend.
See, we knew we'd come up with something for you.
Yeah, exactly. No, I didn't. I honestly didn't know that. I mean, I think I heard some things, but I didn't know that was actually out or anything. And does it require the new SSMS or?
So right now it does, at least according to documentation, it does. At least that's the way they're encouraging it.
Makes sense.
The way, I mean, it was in private preview before SSMS 21 came out, so I don't know if it's possible to set it up. But if you go by documentation, it requires SSMS 21. But I mean, it's the way SSMS still has been lately. It's a free download.
Right. That's cool. Well, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. So do check out the video. I think that's a big part of it. I think the other side, and so we've talked about like, okay, hey, we're going to do Power Query. We're going to have Python, right? And we're going to bring it together with SQL. That's great. That's all about the enablement. But the other side of this coin is, and this is where I think a lot of companies get fed up or get scared or just say, just no, stop. as we kind of talked about, is because they don't have a good response or understanding about like what does data governance look like when it comes to citizen data engineering, right? And really, I think the big fear is how do we differentiate between the order of the enterprise and the chaos of a citizen data engineering space? Now, I will say, come in here. I've worked extensively in organizations that have had to juggle these things, and I really talk about, if you're going to do this, you need to be very clear on two specific lanes. So lane one is how do you secure your organization and the data so that people can understand like what is, or that they, number one, that they can't accidentally send the data outside of your organization or expose PII or expose PHI information. Right? So security becomes a paramount function that you need to have built into your platform. And you're going to do that through enterprise AD groups, and you're going to do it in or intra ID groups. You're going to do it with a focus in on enablement, but a caution for securing. So that's guardrail number one. Guardrail number two is you don't want people in your organization to hurt other people inside the org, right? So you don't want someone to accidentally blow away your enterprise customer table or your enterprise assets, right? So you need to make sure that you've got strong walls that guard between people hurting each other inside of your organization, right? And so
there's no undo and sequel.
Right. Yeah. There's no undo and sequel. So you don't, it's not just a, control Z.
Right? I did a commit. Why can't I do a rollback again?
Right. Right. So you've got to have those two boundaries in place. And once you have those two boundaries in place, you use that as your highway and enable people to do what they need to do, whatever they need to do inside of those spaces, right? And so then you start to pull off that tight governance that you might have on IT and that enterprise sources with your high SLAs and like, you allow, it has to be up 99.999% of the time, and you've got an on-call support schedule for your enterprise assets. For your department or teams or even individual assets, you have lowering degrees of standards for what it takes for those things to manage and operate, right? And then you monitor, right? You allow people to go and do what? You provide direction and best practices on like, hey, here's our recommended Python notebooks. Here's our templates that we want you to use. Here's the stuff for Power Query. Like, we recommend you use these Power Query standards as part of it, and stick in like automated field calculations that do things like inject the process that ran it, inject the time stamp that the data was created, right? Give that to people, encourage them to use those things. So if that citizen data engineering component needs to ever move into IT, if they're using those templates, it becomes an easy lift for that to move out of that space.
Yeah, I totally agree on that, right? Is, if you have somebody that's out in at a department, right, kind of the business, and they're going to know it a whole lot better, right? I mean, I've even looked at that as a way of getting requirements, right? Hey, you've learned Python, you know this stuff well enough. Here's a few things I'll share with you. Why don't you just go at it, and why don't you kind of build what you think it needs to look like, right? And again, here's the standards. Here's use this, recommend this, because this will help in the migration, and it'll help tell us what it is that you're looking for, right? And then we just turn it into, even more robust standards so that it, it doesn't fail, or when it does fail, it gives the right alerting and it can be restarted correctly. I wouldn't expect the citizen developer or the person in the department to be able to do that. But man, I mean, when you get those type of requirements, give you a lot of good guidance on exactly what you need to do. Excuse me.
I love that approach.
Yeah.
I really like the approach of a playbook, almost based on patterns that emerge out of the more popular reports in either the enterprise or departments. And I see that as bouncing back and forth between the order and the chaos, because what I heard you talk about, Kevin, that describes new requirements that sometimes IT can't come up with on their own, but the business realizes they could really use this additional report, this new measure, and providing some process where there's this constant feedback between the order and the chaos, if you will, so that the enterprise grows.
Yeah, well, and given requirements in the English language sometimes doesn't yield the results that you want. So what if they built something, they go, this is what I think the data is going to look like at the end, right?
Right.
You go, okay, well, yeah, you think it looks like that, and probably it's 90% correct, but what do we got to do to get it to be 100%? Because I'm seeing this that they're not going to look for. But man, you get there so much faster, because they're involved, they're invested with it.
Well, and one of the things I've seen that is the prime example and why every company needs to have this type of pattern, even for secured PHI or PII information, is as analytics teams are experimenting with data first categorizational definitions of what is successful, what is not successful, A/B testing. They may go through hundreds of iterations of what a definition is. How do you define customers? How do you define patients? How do you define employees as who's successful, who's not, who's middling, right? And they may iterate through that many times over many, many months, right? And track it and say hey, you know what? I've got 10 definitions in place for how I would categorize our employees.
Yeah.
If I said this was my definition, what would this mean a year from now? Would my A's really all be performing as A's? Would I have categorized some F's who then pull out and become A's, right? Or B's or even C's? Am I possibly about to fire someone who, is on the verge of turning things around, and I've got data that can show that they're about to turn things around, right? I've seen that in practice. I've seen teams trying that stuff out, and I've seen them help their companies make much better decisions because they're iterating through this stuff in a rapid succession, in a pattern that you would not want IT to have to support building out all of these different pipelines across a high cardinality dimension with all of these different fluctuating metrics. You just wouldn't want to do that. It would just be grossly expensive for IT to do that. And that's where citizen data engineering comes into play. Christina, you started to tell a story about where you were doing some of that stuff with your cohort analysis. Can you talk about how you leverage that?
Yeah. So you're talking about when I was over there and started doing the CTEs and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. So when I was learning all of that, they ended up pulling me onto the analytics team at that point, because then they could monitor and help train me up. And so it ended up working out well, where we were kind of a hybrid team where we were really closely connected to certain business units, and we got to know those business units, right? So we ended up being kind of a translation layer between true business units who don't want to know all the data, right? They want the summary that they can make decisions off of, and they can make decisions, but they need to know that that data is correct. They need to know they can trust it. They need to know that the definitions change with what they need. So that was a lot of our job, was okay, as an analytics team, you're doing some of the citizen engineering, right? But you're also part of enterprise data analytics. So it was kind of this really nice spot to be, where we could do some light engineering, is what I would call it, right? We weren't materializing tables. That wasn't part of our job. We could put in requests for different views that we wanted, but we would have to come to the table with, hey, this is what we need, this is why, and this is where these things are different, and this is how I've optimized it. Right, that was a really big part of taking something from my citizen engineering and promoting it to production. Right. So I think what you're talking about is exactly that.
Quick question on that, right?
Yeah.
So like, because you made a comment that you could request these views, right? And so when you know, because so you were kind of in IT, but you didn't have the access to implement a view yourself.
Nope.
But when you requested a view, did you typically give the SQL for it?
Yes.
Which plays exactly into what we were kind of talking about, right?
Exactly.
So you would get those requests, number one, accepted faster and implemented faster, right?
Well, and they could always argue it back, right? That was always their prerogative of like, hey, this view's crazy. We're not like,
Yeah.
What if we optimize it this way? Does that still work for your need? Do you actually need all these rows, or can we aggregate it a little short? You know, do you actually have to hit the link server, or can we get that data from somewhere else, right?
Yeah.
And so all those kind of things were on them, and it was a great relationship. I mean, we had our obviously butting heads of them changing my password, but it worked out in the end, where it was like a good respectful relationship of like, hey, I need data because I'm helping a lot of people make business decisions that at the end of the day make our company function, but you need to protect the data so that all our applications still run.
Right.
So it really was this nice tension of like, okay, how do we open it up where we only had a team of I think 4 of us. So it's like, okay, these 4 analytics folks, they have, you know, limited access to the kingdom. They can get into the first gate. And then when they need other stuff, they just reach out to us. But it's not this huge number of like 500 employees reaching out to us, right? So it was kind of like we had some different layers of self-service.
Well, and I absolutely love that, because it doesn't mean all chaos all the time when we say citizen data engineering, right? We want to enable that. We want to like create lanes where they're able to work, or we want to create engagement frameworks. And I think the last thing, we're running a little short on time, but I want to hit up Andy and say to Andy, like, how can we leverage data pipelines? You know, either just purely as citizen data engineers, or in conjunction with the work that the enterprise is doing with their pipelines.
Yeah, so it's important to realize that there are tools out there and platforms that you can use either way. So in one sense, you can do data exploration. That's one topic, and I see a lot of citizen data engineers begin that way, regardless of the platform tools that they use. They start by trying to learn more about the data, and it kind of reminds me of Christina's story of how she evolved into this, and yours too, Jared, of how you came into it. But you may reach a point where you need more, you need faster, and then you want to pivot into some tool, one of the data factories, or something that's a little more designed, maybe a little better designed even, to strictly focus on picking up that data from point A and moving it to point B, and doing all of the steps in between. We talk about extract, transform, and load, the old ETL acronym. And that's a pattern of obtaining data from these source A's and loading them into source B's. And there's way more to it than that. Being able to extract data from a system of record without taking that system down, that becomes a part of the equation. Being able to load it into a structure, data lake, data warehouse, without interfering with queries that may be going on at the same time. All of that begins to come into play, and it's not something you think about necessarily when you're doing that initial exploration.
Yeah, and I think that's the advantage of a tooling like Fabric, is we can all work in one place. We can use common tools, we can use common technologies. And so if you're a citizen engineer and you're using Power Query and Python and you're doing your work, but you're using Data Factory for your pipelines, you can, if you've properly structured it and you have good governance in, say, okay, hey, enterprise data team, I've built out a process that currently I run 5 times a day because I'm waiting for the customer dimension to finish loading. I'd like to not run it 5 times a day. Could you call this pipeline when the enterprise is done loading the customer dimension? And then you can, as an enterprise, you can have that layer of your pipelines and say, okay, hey, I'm loading my, I'm going from loading my enterprise, that is complete, and now I'm triggering all of my pipelines for my citizen engineers, right? And then, because you're all using the same tech, you're all using the same platform. This becomes a real easy API call, and it's a nice governed framework where we basically kind of get together, shake hands, and work in peace, love, and harmony.
Well, I was doing the hand sign here because that's orchestration.
Yeah.
And it's a topic near and dear to my heart. And you're absolutely right. These processes and ideas constantly evolve in an enterprise, at least a healthy enterprise. And the communication that takes place across teams and the evolution of, people making their way, taking the paths both Jared and Christina took, those are all healthy and good.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, we are at time. An incredibly lively conversation. Thank you guys all so much. I'm going to ask Jared. I'm going to put you on the spot here, Jared. Can you do the side eye? Can you take us out today?
Sure. So I think at least the way I'd frame up today's conversation is what it innately shows the spirit of having citizen data engineers, analysts, scientists, whatever you name them, is that data connects all of us. That's why this is such an important topic, is because whether we like it or not, data influences us in profound ways. And the nice thing about that is we all see data differently. We see it from different perspectives because we live different lives. And data is really what helps us join all of our different viewpoints together to come up with a common mindset that really helps accelerate whatever it is we're trying to do as a society. So I think the big takeaway for me from this is we can go talk for days about effective data administration, performance, and all of that. Start with curiosity. Curiosity is what should drive us to want to do things with data. So let that curiosity drive you. Become a citizen, developer, data engineer, whatever that citizen status is that you're looking for, and the rest will follow when the time comes right. But start with the curiosity, and you'll have a fun experience for hopefully many years to come.
Full outer join curiosity.
All right. And with that, thank you guys all so much for joining us today. You have the best day ever. Peace.
Peace.
Digital combines strategic industry insight and advanced technical expertise to uncover and solve your digital transformation challenges. If you're interested in learning more, check out our website at bakertilly.com/digital.